Hi guys, it is a new month, which means a new book, and it's called Inkheart by Cornelia Funk. And this is the book that I read with Hannah from Hannah's Hollows, so I'm going to do my own. But I'm not going to read the inscription thing. So since this book is longer than 30 or 31 days, I'm going to have to upload 2 chapters in a day instead of 1 chapter a day because it's so long. Same with the other 2 books by Cornelia Funk, which is Ink Death and Ink Spell, which will be probably November's book, maybe. Okay, ready. Inkheart by Cornelia Funk. Chapter 1. A Stranger in the Night. Rain fell that night, a fine whispering rain, many years later. Maggie had only to close her eyes and she could still hear it, like tiny fingers tapping on the window pane. A dog barked somewhere in the darkness, and however often she tossed and turned, Maggie couldn't get to sleep. The book she had been reading was under her pillow, pressing its cover against her ear as if to lure her back into its printed pages. I'm sure it must be very comfortable sleeping with a hard rectangular thing like that under your head, her father had teased the first time he found a book under her pillow. Go on, admit it. The book whispers its story to you at night. Sometimes, yes, Maggie had said, but it only works for children, which made Mo tweak her nose. Mo, Maggie had never called her father anything else. That night when so much began and so many things changed forever, Maggie had one of her favorite books under her pillow, and since the rain wouldn't let her sleep, she sat up, rubbing the drowsiness from her eyes, and took it out. Its pages rustled promisingly when she opened it. Maggie thought this first whisper sounded a little different from one book to another. Different depending on whether or not she already knew the story I was going to tell her. But she needed light. She had a box of matches hidden in the drawer of her bedside table. Mo had forbidden her to light candles at night. He didn't like fire. Fire devours books, he always said. But she was 12 years old. She surely could be trusted to keep an eye on the couple of candles flames. Maggie loved to read by candlelight. She had 5 candlesticks on the windowsill, and she was just holding the lighted match to one of the black wicks. When she heard footsteps outside, she blew out the match in alarm. Oh, how well she remembered it, even many years later, and knelt to look out of the window, which was wet with rain. Then she saw him. The rain cast a kind of pallor or dark on the darkness, and the stranger was little more than a shadow. Only his face gleamed white as he looked up at Maggie. His hair clung to his wet forehead. The rain was falling on him, but he ignored it. He stood there motionless, arms crossed over his chest, as if that might at least warm him a little, and he kept staring at the house. I must go wake up Mo, thought Maggie, but she stayed put, her heart thudding, and went on gazing out into the night, as if the stranger's stillness had infected her. Suddenly he turned his head, and Maggie felt as if he were looking and Maggie felt as if he were looking straight into her eyes. She shut, shut off the bed as so fast the open book fell to the floor. She ran in barefoot out into the dark corridor. This was the end of May, but it was chilly in the old house. There was still a light on in Mo's room. He often stayed up, reading late in the night. Maggie had inherited her love for books from her father. When she took refuge from a bad dream with him, knowing could lull her to sleep better than Mo's calming breathings beside her and the sounds of pages turning. Nothing meaning reading to her. Nothing chased nightmares away faster than the rustle of printed paper. But the figure outside the house was no dream. The book Mo was reading that night was bound in pale blue linen. Pale blue linen. This was red. um, later, later, Maggie remembered that too. What an unimportant little details stick in the memory. Mo, there's someone out in the yard. Her father raised his head and looked at her with the usual absent expression he wore when she interrupted his reading. It always took him a few minutes to find his way out of that other world, the labyrinth of printed letters. Someone's out in the yard. Are you sure? Yes, he's staring at our house. Mo put down his book. So what are you reading before you went to sleep? Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Maggie frowned. Please, Mo, come and look. He didn't believe her, but he went anyway. Don't cry, Wolf. Maggie tugged him along the corridor so impatiently that he stubbed his toe on a pile of books, which was hardly surprising. Stacks of books were piled high over the house, not just arranged in neat rows on bookshelves, the way other people kept them. Oh no! The books in Mo and Maggie's house were stacked under tables, on chairs in the corners of the rooms. There were books in the kitchen, books in the lavatory, books, that means the bathroom, books on the TV set and in the closet, small piles of books, tall piles of books, books thick and thin, books old and new. They welcomed Maggie down to breakfast with inviting open pages. They kept boredom at bay when the weather was bad, and sometimes you fell over them. He's just standing there, whispered Maggie, leading Mo into her room. Has he got a fairy face? Hairy face? If so, he could be a wolf. Oh, stop it! Maggie looked at him sternly, although his jokes made her feel less scared. Already she hardly believed any more in the figures standing in the rain, until she knelt down again at the window. There, do you see him? She whispered. Mo looked out through the raindrops running down the pane and said nothing. Didn't you promise burglars would never break into our house because there's nothing here to steal? Whispered Maggie. He's not a burglar, replied Mo, but he has stepped back from the window. His face was so grave that Maggie's heart thudded faster than ever. Go back to bed, Maggie, he said. This visitor has come to see me. He left the room before Maggie could ask what kind of visitor, for goodness sake, turned up in the middle of the night. She followed him anxiously. As she crept down the corridor, she heard her father taking the chain off the front door. And when she reached the hall, she saw him standing in the open doorway. The night came in, dark and damp, and rushing of the rain sounded loud and threatening. Dustfinger, called Mo into the darkness. Is that you? Dustfinger? What kind of name was that? Maggie couldn't remember ever hearing it before. Yet it sounded familiar, like a distant memory that couldn't take shape properly. At first, All seemed still outside except for the rain falling murmuring, as if the night had found its voice. But then footsteps approached the house, and the man emerged from the darkness of the yard, and his long coat, so wet with rain that it clung to his large leg. For a split second, as the stranger stepped into the light, spilling out of the house, Maggie thought she saw a small furry head over his shoulder, snuffling as it looked out of his backpack, and then quickly disappearing back into it. Dustfinger wiped his wet face with his sleeve and offered Mo his hand. "How are you, Silvertongue?" he asked. "It's been a long time, hasn't it?" Hastily, Mo took the outstretched hand. "A very long time," he said, looking past his visitor as he expected to see another figure emerge from the night. "Come in. You'll catch your death. Maggie says you've been standing out there for some time." "Maggie? Oh yes, of course." Dustfinger let Mo lead him into the house. He scrutinized Maggie so thoroughly she felt quite embarrassed and didn't know where to look. In the end, she just stared back. "She's grown. You remember her?" "Of course." These are short chapters anyway. Maggie noticed that Mo double-locked the door. "How old is she now?" Dustfinger smiled at her. It was a strange smile. Maggie couldn't decide whether it was mocking, supercilious, or just awkward. She didn't smile back. 12, said Mo. 12, my word. Dustfinger pushed his dripping hair back from his forehead. It reached almost to his shoulders. Maggie wondered what color it was when it was dry. The stubble around his narrow-lipped mouth was gingery, like the fur of the stray cat Maggie sometimes fed with a saucer of milk outside the door. Ginger hair sprouted out on his cheeks to express as a boy's first beard, but not but not long enough to hide three long pale scars. They made Dustfinger's face look as if it had been smashed and stuck together again. 12, he repeated. Of course. She was, let's see. She was 3 then, wasn't she? Mo nodded. Come on. I'll find you some dirty clothes. Dry clothes. Impatiently, as if he were suddenly in a hurry to hide the man from Maggie, he led his visitor across the hall. "And Maggie," he said over his shoulder, "you go back to sleep." Then, without another word, he closed his workshop door. Maggie stood there rubbing her cold feet together. Go back to sleep. Sometimes, when they'd stay up late yet again, Mo could toss her down on the bed like a bag of walnuts. Sometimes he chased her around the house after supper until she escaped into her room, restless with laughter, and sometimes he was so tired he lay down on the sofa, and she made him a cup of coffee before she went to bed. But he had never, ever sent her off to her room so brusquely. A foreboding, clammy, and fearful came into her heart, as if along with the visitor, whose name was so strange yet somehow familiar, some menace had slipped into her life, and she wished so hard it frightened her that she had never gone to get Mo and Dustfinger had stayed outside until the rain washed him away. When the door of the workshop opened again, she jumped. Still there, I see, said Mo. Go to bed, Maggie, please. He had that little frown on his nose that appeared only when something was really worrying him, and he seemed to look straight through her, as if his thoughts were somewhere else entirely. The forbidding boding as Maggie's heart grew. I can't say that word. Spreading like black wings. Send him away, Mo, she said as he bent gently propelled her toward the room. Please, send him away. I don't like him. Mo leaned in her open doorway. He'll be gone when you get up in the morning. Word of honor. Word of honor? No fingers, no crossed fingers? Maggie looked him straight in the eye. She could always tell when Mo was lying. However, no matter how hard, however hard he tried to hide it from her, no crossed fingers, he said, holding both hands out to show her. Then oh yeah, like this. Then he closed her door, even though he knew she didn't like that. Maggie put her ear to it, listening. She could hear the clink of china, so the man with the sandy beard was getting a nice cup of tea to warm him up. I hope he catches pneumonia, thought Maggie, though he needed necessarily to die of it. Maggie heard the kettle whistling in the kitchen, and Mo's carrying a tray of clattering crockery back to the workshop. When that door closed, she forced herself to wait a few more seconds, just to be on the safe side. Then she crept back out into the hallway. There was a sign hanging on the door of Mo's workshop. A small metal plaque. Maggie knew the words on it by heart. When she was 5, she had only practiced reading the old-fashioned spelling letters. Some books should be tasted, some devoured, but only a few should be chewed and disgusted thoroughly. Oh, we're almost done. Back then, when she still had the climb on her box to read the plaque, she had thought the chewing and disguising were meant literally and wonderful. Horrified, why Mo had hung on his workshop door the words of someone who vandalized books. Now she knew what the plaque really meant by tonight. She wasn't interested in written words. Spoken words were what she wanted to hear. The words being exchanged in soft, almost inaudible whispers by the 2 men on the other side of the door. Don't underestimate him, she heard Dustfinger say. His voice was so different from Mo's. No one else in the world had a voice like her father's. Mo could paint pictures in the empty air with his voice alone. He'd do anything to get a hold of it. That was Dustfinger again. And when I say anything, I can assure you I mean anything. I never let him have it. That was Mo. He'll still get his hands on it, one way or another. I tell you, they're only your trail. It wouldn't be the first time. I always managed to shake them off before. Oh yeah? And for how much longer do you think? What about your daughter? Are you telling me she's actually like moving around the whole time? Believe me, I know what I'm talking about. It was so quiet behind the door that Maggie scarcely dared breathe, in case the 2 men heard her. Finally her father spoke again, hesitantly, as if his tongue found it difficult to form the words. Then what do you think I ought to do? Come with me. I'll take you to them. A cup clinked. The sound of a spoon against china. How loud small noises sound in the silence. You know how much Capricorn thinks of your talents. He'd be glad if you took it to him, or of your own free will. I'm sure he would. The man he found to replace you is useless, Capricorn. Another peculiar name. Dustfinger had utterly it as if there were mere sound might scorch his tongue. Maggie wriggled her chilly toes and winkled her cold nose. She didn't understand much of what the 2 men were saying, but she tried to memorize every single word of it. It was quiet again in the workshop. Oh, I don't know, said Mo at last. He sounded so wearily, it tore at Maggie's heart. I'd have to think about it. When do you think his men will get here? Soon. The word dropped like a stone into the silence. Soon, replied Mo. Very well. I'll have made up my mind by tomorrow. Do you have somewhere to sleep? Oh, I can always find a place, replied Dustfinger. I'm managing quite well these days, although it's still all much too fast for me. His laugh was not a happy one, but I'd like to know what you're deciding. May I come back tomorrow? About midday? Yes, of course. I'll be picking Maggie up from school at 1:30. Come after that. Maggie heard a chair being pushed back and scurried back to her room. When the door of the workshop opened, she was just closing her bedroom door behind her. Pulling the covers up to her chin, she lay there listening as her father said good-bye to Dustfinger. And thank you for the warning again, anyway, she heard him had added as Dustfinger's footsteps moved away, slowly and uncertainly, as if they were reluctant to leave, as if he had said everything he'd wanted to say, but at least he was gone, and only the rain kept drumming its wet fingers on Maggie's window. When Mo opened the door of her room, she quietly closed her eyes and tried to breathe as slowly as you do in a deep, innocent sleep. But Mo wasn't stupid. In fact, he was sometimes terribly clever. Maggie, put one of your feet out of the bed, he told her. Reluctantly, she stood her toes out from under the bed and laid them in Mo's warm hand. They were still cold. I knew it, he said. You've been spying. Can't you do as I tell you? What I tell you, just for once? Sighing, he tucked her foot back underneath the nice warm blanket. Then he sat down on her bed, passed his hands over his tired face, and looked out the window. His hair was as dark as moleskin. Maggie had fair hair like her mother, whom she knew only from a few faded photographs. You should be glad you look like her than me, Mo always said. My head wouldn't look good as all the girl's neck. And my head wouldn't look good at all on a girl's neck, but Maggie wished she did look more like him. There wasn't a face in the world she loved more. I didn't hear what you were saying anyway, she murmured. Good. Mo stared out the window as if Dustfinger were still standing in the yard. When he rose and went to the door, trying to get some sleep, he said. But Maggie didn't want to sleep. Dustfinger? What sort of a name is that? She asked. And why does he call you Silvertongue? Mo did not reply. And this person who's looking for you. I heard what Dustfinger called him. Capricorn. Who is he? No one you want to meet. Her father didn't turn around. I thought you didn't hear anything. Good night, Maggie. This time he left her door open. The light from the hallway fell on her bed, mingling with darkness of the night that seeped in through the windows. And Maggie lay there waiting for the dark to disappear and take her fear of some evil man Ace away with it. Menace away from it. Only later did she understand that the evil had not appeared for the first time that night. It had just slunk back in again. And that's the end of chapter 1. I will show you the pictures like Hannah. So that is our books. So stay tuned for chapter 2. Which will also be uploaded today as well. So please stay tuned for that chapter later on today. Please subscribe, comment, and like to Christy's Book Corner. And don't forget to dare to dream, guys. Bye.